a lot of great conversation and a lot of great fellowship going on. I'm excited to hear that and excited to see that. I want to welcome you to, this is the second in our series of Women in Agriculture Leadership Luncheons. The purpose of these luncheons is just for people to get to know each other, for people to meet people that they don't already know in this college or that work in allied organizations, and to make networks so that we can all work together better, understand what each other does. That's kind of one of my personal philosophies. If people understand what each other do, then they are way more apt to work together. And so I'm Laura Perry Johnson. I'm the Associate Dean for Extension in the College of Ag and Environmental Sciences. But I also want to welcome those from other colleges. We have some from forestry, from family and consumer sciences, for some of our public service and outreach units, from vet school, and we welcome everyone to the conversation that involves agriculture, because it is a much broader conversation than just the College of Ag. I also want to welcome those that are at our remote locations. We have people joining us from both Tifton and Griffin. Brianna Corsi is our host down in Tifton, and Ellen Bowski in Griffin. We appreciate them doing that today. Is she not there? Oh, she's waving. Okay. And then we also have several people that have joined online via Zoom that couldn't be at one of our 3 locations. So we really appreciate that. I think there may even be some people from USDA in Washington that have joined, because they are very interested in this conversation about women in ag leadership that is continuing at this college. This really came out of our Women's Leadership Summit that was held back in February, that Krista Harden was our featured speaker. And so she's very excited that we're continuing to build upon the things that we started there. So I'm excited that you are all here. You know, people ask me, would they come if you don't buy them lunch? But I guess they will. So I appreciate the fact that y'all came and brought your lunches. And we're going to continue to try to do this quarterly. My goal when I started this was try to feature somebody that's kind of in the basic area and someone's that's in the more applied area, so we could look at how those, we really have more similarities than we do differences. And our first speakers were Kristen Navarra and Maria Navarro. You have to think before you say those 2 names. And it was so interesting to hear them talk, because they had so many similarities, even though what they do today in their day-to-day jobs are so different. So I'm happy to have Maria with us and here today. The 2 people that I picked today that are going to speak with us are very different in what they do day to day in their jobs, but they're people that I definitely admire, and they have very strong reputations in our colleges, also across the nation in the field, in their field, and in the overall fields of agriculture. So I thought that this would be a great, interesting match. Also, both of them have ended up being very, very accomplished in their fields, but they've also moved into administrative positions. And so I thought it would be interesting to hear, you know, how they made that decision and how that influences what they do today. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker and let her visit with us. Dr. Peggy Ozias-Akins. If you don't know her, you probably recognize her face, because this picture has been everywhere in the Women in Agriculture promotions. So I was on the Tifton campus with Peggy for years, and I knew she was a scientist, and I knew she was brilliant, and I knew she was a basic researcher. But if somebody would have asked me to tell you what she did, I really couldn't. I knew she did something with breeding, and so I'm really excited today to have her explain exactly what she does. But I tried to find some interesting things to tell you when I'm introducing her. First of all, she is very humble and very quiet, and doesn't like to brag about herself or talk about herself, so it's hard to pull out some of these things. So I Googled you from nine ways to Sunday, trying to find out some of the stuff about you, Peggy. But Peggy's title right now is the Director of the Institute for Plant Breeding, Genetics, and Genomics, which is a long title, and I'm sure she's going to talk a little bit about those responsibilities today. You know, if you know her on the Tifton campus like I did, she does a lot of work with peanuts, so I would have always thought she's in crop and soil sciences, but she's actually a professor of horticulture. She got her bachelor's degree from Florida State and her PhD from the University of Florida, so I didn't know she was a Gator. And when I tried to figure out exactly what she does so I could tell you, the one sentence that actually puts it in layman's terms so we can all understand it is, she does work on the female reproductive and gene transfer in plants. And so she came to the University of Georgia in 1986 and has really made quite a name for herself. I remember last year she was honored on the football field at one of the games, so that's quite an honor. And I still remember she did real well for the Jumbotron. She had on a beautiful red scarf that day. So, but she has received quite a few awards. The Creative Medal, Research Medal from the University of Georgia, which is quite impressive. She was one of the inaugural Women's Leadership Fellows, the group that the provost put together recently. And she's also a D.W. Brooks Distinguished Professor. When I read some of the background material on her, she said one of her favorite places to be is reviewing data with a colleague, postdoc, or student. What a true basic scientist. And a really cool thing that she does is she's the pianist at her church. And I found that interesting because I know Jean is the music director at her church, and so that's another thing that they have in common. So without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Peggy and let her tell us what she does and some of her ideas about women in agricultural leadership positions.
Thank you, Laura. It is an honor to have been invited by Laura to speak in this series. I am going to make this more of a personal account than perhaps give you any profound insights into women's leadership, so some of you may be disappointed by that. This picture has made it around in a lot of places, and Corley Holbrook is actually in Tifton. He can attest that I do some crossing of peanuts, so this is not entirely posed. It was posed for the day. But if you see me in a picture in a lab coat now, it's been a while since I've really gotten in the lab and done any true research. So I'm a little unusual, I guess, for a scientist in that I ended back in the location for most of my professional career where I was born. So I was born in Tifton, Georgia. As you've already heard from Laura, I went to Florida State University in Tallahassee for my undergraduate, on to Gainesville, to the Gators for my graduate education. And then from there, actually across the Atlantic to Cologne, Germany. And that was at a time when Germany was still divided into East and West. You can see that's bidirectional there because I came back to Gainesville and was a visiting assistant scientist there for a couple of years before then moving as a faculty member, assistant professor to Tifton. And so really I'm a product of my parents and my maternal grandmother who really gave me the liberty to enter into any activities that I was interested in. And they never really made me aware that there would be any limitation for females. I was also a product of the public school system in Tift County, along with, and to some extent, the University of Georgia and 4-H. I did participate in 4-H in elementary school, went to several 4-H camps at Rock Eagle, where obviously expressed an interest in nature, in this case recreation, also presciently, I suppose, in leadership. And I had a doting father who amassed these scrapbooks for me of newspaper clippings, programs, as you can see from science fair, photographs, etc., that I still have. And so actually these are some pretty poor cell phone pictures of some of those items. Science obviously was an interest of mine from early on. This is a third grade science fair where I did a project on trees. I really don't remember much about what that project actually entailed. But you can see that although I may be unusual, I'm actually not unique. Look at two names down. Paul Sumner, some of you may recognize that name. He's retired now, but an extension engineer in Tifton, and he was a classmate of mine. I continued with an interest in science and science fair through junior high and high school, actually going from the regional to the state science fair, which was held here in Athens at the Coliseum. I think it probably still is. And there won actually a first place in the junior division. If you look here at what was in the newspaper clipping, you can see the title of the project. It says, the effects of the virulent and avirulent strains of the bacterium Pseudomonas solanacearum on tomatoes. Actually, my advisor for this project was Durham Bell. So some people may know that name. He's a plant pathologist, a faculty member with plant pathology in Tifton, now deceased. And his wife actually worked as one of my first technicians in Tifton. I did have some competing interests, and you've already heard about one of them, piano. And I went to music camp at Florida State University while I was in high school. Apparently did pretty well, but then I also learned that there are much more talented people in music, and probably not what I needed to pursue for a career. But obviously FSU made an impression on me because I ended up going back there for my bachelor's degree. And at Florida State, I was interested in science, but interested in plants and plant biology. And Florida State, of course, is not an agricultural school, but they do have a very good biology department, did then and still do. And so I went there as an honors student, and I worked in my honors project on terrestrial orchids. This is Platanthera ciliaris, or also known as Habenaria is another genus name. It's a fairly rare orchid, but it grows in the longleaf pine wiregrass ecosystem. And so actually I worked around the Tall Timbers Research Station area and also in the Apalachicola National Forest, doing some work on pollination biology of this orchid. And that work actually was led by a mentor, Norris Williams. Norris Williams was a faculty member in the biology department who actually later moved to the University of Florida and the Natural History Museum there, where this picture was actually taken from. But another mentor there was Margaret Menzel. And so a very well-respected female scientist, geneticist, who actually taught me genetics as an undergraduate, and continued to encourage that interest in biology and obviously in genetics. She later on asked me to serve as a moderator at a meeting of the Association of Southeastern Biologists when I had moved to Gainesville. So I really had not focused in on agriculture at that point, but my fiance was the son of a farmer and also very involved in FFA, and so I didn't come from an agricultural background, but obviously there's a lot of agriculture around Tifton, and so a lot of people that we knew were involved in agriculture. And so I guess this connection of eventual marriage also spurred my interest in agriculture, as did my move to the University of Florida and the work that I began there for my PhD research, which was on wheat tissue culture and somatic embryogenesis in wheat. Wheat obviously is a huge crop, not so much in Georgia, but globally. And I actually took this bad cell phone picture of the title page of my dissertation to bring out a point is it was typed. We did not have desktop computers at that time. I had to hire a typist. I did not learn to type, and that was, I guess, a rebellious moment during high school when typing was a field that women were supposed to go into, and I regretted not learning to type. I do okay to write manuscripts now, but I could probably do it a lot more efficiently if I had learned to type. And so the work that I did for my PhD research was, as I said, on somatic embryogenesis and wheat tissue cultures. And this was not only in the lab where I was working, but in other labs. Work was being done to learn how to establish tissue cultures that could regenerate into whole plants. And actually, this was very similar research in order to allow us to genetically engineer plants. And that's eventually where I headed, which I'll show in a minute. And so my advisor, my PhD advisor, was Indra Vasile, shown on the left. This is a picture that was taken in 2007, not 1981, when I was in Gainesville. But along with him, working in his lab, was his wife, who was also a PhD and an excellent research scientist in her own right, and probably had more influence on teaching me how to do research than Dr. Vasile did, than Indra Vasile did. In fact, they received a team award, Lifetime Achievement Award from the Society for In Vitro Biology in 2007. Indra Vasile was also somewhat of a historian. He had an interest in history, and I remember in his morphology class always telling us a lot about the people who were involved in making these scientific discoveries. I followed a little bit of that model in the ag biotech class that I teach. But he has written a couple of interesting articles. That one is on the story of transgenic cereals, and then another that's a little bit more personal about the wanderings of a botanist. So Dr. Vasile had been an Alexander von Humboldt Fellow at one point in Germany, and he encouraged me to apply to that program for a postdoctoral fellowship. I did apply and was awarded that fellowship, and went to the Max Planck Institute for Plant Breeding, which is actually in Vogelsang. It's a small village that is outside on the outskirts there of Cologne, Germany. Cologne is famous for its cathedral. This is a very famous institute, actually, in Germany and worldwide for plant breeding. And I was there from 1982 to 1984, and this was really a seminal time in the history of the development of transgenic plants. And one of the persons, the one on your right there, Jeff Schell, Joseph Schell is his name, but he was more commonly known as Jeff Schell, was director of the Institute. And he also was a professor at the University of Ghent, because that was his origin in Belgium. But he had a colleague, Mark Van Montague, and that team was one of 3 teams around the world who were studying Agrobacterium, which is the crown gall bacterium. It's a plant pathogen that actually genetically engineers plant cells. And it does that in the wild such that those plant cells are producing galls, they're producing metabolites now that the bacteria can use to survive and thrive. And so these 3 teams were working to understand that biology of that interaction, but then also how they could learn how they could manipulate that bacterium so that it could remove those crown gall forming cells and replace them, the crown gall forming genes, and replace them with genes that might be of interest to agriculture. So actually, during the time I was at the Max Planck Institute, there was a very important symposium that was held called the Miami Winter Symposium, where these 3 groups presented their results. They were competing groups at the time, but in fact, all 3 competing groups have now been honored with the World Food Prize in 2013. Mark Van Montague representing that group with Jeff Schell, Mary Dell Chilton, who was at Washington University in St. Louis, and later at Syngenta. Well, it was first Ciba-Geigy and then eventually became Syngenta. It's actually still there. And Rob Fraley, along with Rob Horsch, making those initial discoveries. Rob Fraley is still at Monsanto. Rob Horsch is actually at the Gates Foundation now. And so these discoveries led to the development of genetically modified organisms, as they're known in the popular literature. So really, the one that fits the definition that's used in the popular literature is golden rice, because it's developed from the introduction of just a few genes that involve the synthesis of beta-carotene and ultimately vitamin A. One on the left is actually not considered genetically modified according to current definitions, but it is, in my view, a genetically modified organism. And obviously, you know, at least as far as the phenotype, a lot more difference in the domestication of maize and the genetic changes that occurred in order for that domestication to occur than in the production of GMOs. So I'm just, you know, always baffled at the controversy that arises because of genetically modified organisms. Because now we can really do precision breeding. We can do, you know, breeding with much more sophisticated methods of introducing just one or a few genes, and now we can actually even target where those genes insert in a genome. So it's becoming increasingly sophisticated how we can change a plant for just very targeted traits that might be beneficial to agriculture. Traditional breeding, you're combining sets of genes, and so in many cases you don't really know what all of those genes are doing. And so even though there is this, you know, tremendous controversy that seems to be growing in the U.S. and in some places globally, genetically modified organisms have had a huge impact on global agriculture. This is actually showing now in green the percentage of the crop globally of soybean, well, of all of these, but of soybean in particular, if you look, it's 82% of the crop is now genetically engineered, fits that GMO definition. So much of my work, I actually work on the female reproduction part, which I'm not going to talk about at all, but it's very complex. Apomixis is the botanical term. So I'm sure Corley will be happy that I'm really only talking about peanut. Yeah,
I didn't say that because I couldn't even pronounce it.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say a little bit about peanut, but peanut is one of the crops that I work on, and it's really a fascinating plant, fascinating crop, in that it produces its flowers above ground, but it produces its fruit underground. And so that poses a lot of challenges for, you know, just growing the crop, harvesting the crop, and then also for pests and pathogens, because you have to worry about soil-borne as well as foliar pests and pathogens with peanut. And my lab actually started working on peanut when I became a faculty member with the University of Georgia. We initially spent a lot of time developing a genetic engineering method for peanut because I had been associated with its history and with the development of some of those initial methods. We were successful, and over the years we've introduced dozens of different genes into peanut. Unfortunately, peanut is a relatively minor crop in the U.S., and it doesn't have any large corporations that really would push the marketing of a genetically engineered peanut just because you need a lot of money now to get a product to market, to get it through a regulatory system, to produce all of the data that are required, and years of patience to get it through those systems. We worked with a number of different traits, but this is one that even, you know, would have some consumer interest, and that's producing a reduced allergen peanut. It's not really feasible to produce a non-allergenic peanut because there actually are 13 different proteins in the peanut seed that are allergenic. But there are some of those proteins that cause the more severe allergic reactions than other of those proteins, and those are the ARA-H2 and ARA-H6 that you see here. And actually some of our work with transgenic peanut, we were able to knock down the production of some of those proteins, or almost completely eliminate them. So, you know, this is one potential approach to really introducing a trait that would have consumer benefit. Peanut yield gains, that's the graph on the right, and actually in green there is of the U.S., which you can see is much greater than more the global yield gains of peanut. Peanut yield gains, along with many of the other crops, have increased steadily over the last 50 years when plant breeding has been implemented in all of those crops. However, it really needs to, the slope of that line really needs to change if we're going to feed a population of 9 billion by 2050. And so we really have to make use of all of the tools in our toolkit to be able to do that. And so that includes any types of genetic modification, cultural practices. Certainly, you know, there are many aspects of agriculture that will have to be brought to bear to keep those yield gains going up. And another one of those tools in our toolkit is genomics. And I've recently been involved for the last 4 years or so in the Peanut Genomics Project, serving as actually the co-chair of the Peanut Genomics Initiative, along with Scott Jackson as the chair. Peanut in the U.S., I mentioned, is a minor crop. Globally, it's a more important crop, particularly in some countries such as China, India, and Africa. China is actually the biggest global producer of peanut, and India is second. In India and Africa, much of that peanut production is actually done by smallholder farmers, and many of the smallholder farmers are actually women. And so it's very important to try to improve the crop and to improve it genetically, because it's likely that actually those genetic resources would be more available than some of the other resources, such as fertilizers or chemicals to control pests and diseases. So we've made a lot of progress with sequencing the peanut genome, and actually that progress is being brought to bear on breeding, not only in the U.S., but also have an international project that involves African and Indian collaborators for peanut improvement. So I'm not trained as a classical plant breeder, but plant breeding now is such an interdisciplinary field. It, of course, includes the obvious of genetics and cytogenetics, the study of the chromosomes, but also now, of course, molecular genetics, including DNA sequencing and genomics, but also recombinant DNA, which underlies the production of genetically engineered or transgenic crops. And since with DNA sequencing, we're producing just massive amounts of data, you have to have efficient ways of mining that data. And so more and more, of course, we really need computer science and bioinformatics to be able to mine those data to really ask biological questions and find answers in those data. And more, we're also entering the discipline of engineering for characterizing plant traits. So I was part of the initiative to form the Institute of Plant Breeding, Genetics, and Genomics back in 2008, and actually was elected director in 2012. Some of the members are here. Cecilia McGregor is here. Corley Holbrook is in Tifton. But the mission of the Institute actually was to bring together, in particular, the classical plant breeders, along with the plant breeders that had more of the modern technical training, so more trained in the genomics area, for example, and to try to develop a synergy among those plant breeders. And then also to pass the knowledge on to the next generation of plant breeders by establishing graduate programs and training graduate students. Also, a big part of our mission is to develop improved crop cultivars, in particular ones that would benefit the economy of Georgia, but also ones that are recognized globally. And even before the Institute was formed, the University of Georgia had a strong legacy of plant breeding. You may recognize some of the people in these pictures here. Mike Duran, the Department of Horticulture, is well known for his ornamentals. In particular, endless summer hydrangea, which many of you may have in your gardens. Wayne Hanna is very well known for the breeding of turf grasses, in particular Bermuda grasses. And some of these Bermuda grasses developed in Tifton have been used on World Cup soccer fields, certainly in South Africa and also in Brazil. There's also Jerry Johnson, who's a wheat breeder, and Roger Borma, soybean breeder. These are ones that I'm showing here that have just won the inventorship awards from the University of Georgia, because the University of Georgia actually profits considerably from what our plant breeders release for the cultivars. But the plant breeding programs also profit as well. So a lot of the revenue that comes in because of those cultivar releases comes back to those breeding programs. And many of those breeding programs have no other mechanism for funding, or at least it's not something that you can get a federal grant to fund. There may be commodity funds for them, but this is a very important way to support those breeding programs. Our breeding programs at the University of Georgia are diverse. Agriculture in Georgia is diverse, certainly compared with the Midwest, where you have a lot of cotton and corn in the Midwest. And so this is also attractive to students because, a student may train with a major professor who focuses on a particular crop, and in my case it would be peanut, but that may not be where they end up getting a job. So we have a course called the Plant Breeding Practicum, where all students are required to take it, and they travel and meet with breeders of all of these different crops, and so they get a very good overview of what the breeding practices are with the different types of crops. So for me, as director, it's been very rewarding to see the classical and the molecular breeders come together to form this synergy that really is assisting with cultivar development. I can say it's happened with my own program in collaboration with Corley Holbrook in Tifton. And peanut breeding, we're actually using molecular tools to assist in developing cultivars in that breeding program. But I've seen it happen in other programs as well. And this also, of course, is very good to pass on this information and involve graduate students in these programs because they see both worlds. And nowadays, of course, students really need, although they may focus more on classical or more on genomics, they really need to know about both in order to be successful in this very fast-paced crop improvement world. So with that, I'm going to stop and entertain any questions that you might have.
Any questions for Peggy, or we can wait till the end and ask questions of both of our.
That's fine.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much, Peggy. That was very interesting, and it is also very interesting to see that you had that interest in science from the very beginning. That's what we saw with our speakers the last time we did this, is that they came from different directions, but that interest in science, got them to agriculture and to the College of Ag. So
I knew pretty early it wouldn't be medicine. I didn't like animals.
So thank you very much. That was awesome. Our next speaker today is Dr. Jean Bertrand. Jean and I have an incredibly long history together. We both graduated from the Animal and Dairy Science Department right here in Athens on this campus. And so she was just a little bit ahead of me, so someone that I looked up to and respected and admired. We also co-chaired the college's strategic plan, and if you can't bond over that, you are not going to bond. So I don't know what either one of us did to deserve that, but we spent a lot of quality time together. If you listen to Jean talk, you probably can figure out that she's not from South Georgia. She went to Missouri and then to Iowa State and then ended up here at the University of Georgia. She got her PhD, and actually you might recognize a little familiarity with Dr. Keith Bertrand's name, who is department head of Animal and Dairy Science, and so that is her husband, and they were both here, and then she went to Clemson as a faculty member. And another thing we have in common is she's done a lot of commuting. So for a long time, she was at Clemson, he was here, and they lived in between. So a lot of road miles there. She moved back to the University of Georgia in 2006, and I pulled up the Southscapes article that they did on her when she came back, and it was really interesting to read some of the things that you said you were going to do, because you've done so many of them. She said that she wanted to increase the enrollments in both undergraduate and graduate students in this college, and that is something that has happened. She said that we needed to attract both traditional and non-traditional students, which is something she's worked tirelessly at, and said we need to continue to market ourselves, which that's something we talk about that almost daily now. But when Jean moved into academic programs here in this college, I was in Tifton at the time and just kind of observing what was going on. But one of the things that she did a lot differently is that she looked at that job just like a research job or a faculty job that she had done at Clemson. She started going after extramural funding for academic programs, which is something that hadn't really been done previously. And she's a master grant writer. And so she's done a great job of creating innovative programs and bringing different things into our undergraduate experience. So if you talk to the students, the ability to do undergraduate research, a lot of the opportunities we have in this college was the brainchild of Jean, and she figured out how to fund it by writing the grant. In one interview that I found that she did, when you ask her what's the best thing about working in this college, and she says it's all about the faculty and the students. So she is perfect for her job in academic programs, and she's going to tell us a bit about how she got there and some of her background. So Jean?
Thank you, Laura. I almost wore that jacket today. Yeah, I'm nervous. I don't usually get nervous, but so I'm gonna get kind of personal. So I might conflict with some of your ideas. I don't know, but I am kind of nervous. So here we go. Okay. Well, can you tell which one is me? Which one do you guess me? The youngest, yes. Well, this is where it all started for me. This is me and my 3 sisters. And I actually have 2 brothers. I had an older brother who actually is a foster brother, but he had come and gone by the time this picture was taken. And I have a younger brother, but he's 4 years younger than me, so he was either not born or was a baby and didn't make it on the picture. I grew up in Missouri, Washington, Missouri, on a dairy farm. My father milked 45 Guernsey cows, and so ours was a family farm, and we did all the work. We didn't have any hard labor, and so our farm was really our life. And my dad had a great influence on me because, you know, when you're a dairy farmer and you milk cows twice a day, you milk them every day, and you don't go anywhere. And that was his life, all of his life. My father was born in this house, and he died in this house. He lived his entire life in this house, except for the 2 years that he was in World War II. But he never complained about it. He didn't know any different, I guess, but he loved being a farmer. He loved being a farmer. It was in his blood. He loved watching things grow. And, you know, it was just who he was. And that really rubbed off on me. And growing up, we didn't play sports because we milked cows at 5:30 in the afternoon. And that's when everybody practices, right? So mom was cooking supper, dad was starting to milk, and we did not play sports. We were in 4-H, and that's what we did. And I am truly a product of 4-H, as Peggy is. And I was in 4-H for 10 years, and that's what we did. And our dad was the dairy leader, and our mom was the community club leader, and it was just what we did with work, you know? And, but another thing about my dad is that, you know, there were no boys here, and so we were the helpers. And we got up in the morning, we went down and helped him milk in the morning before school, we helped him milk at night in the summers, we bush hogged, we cultivated corn, we cut hay, you know, we We were his helpers. And so he never treated us any differently than he would have treated his son. And so, I always felt like my dad believed in me and asked me to do things that he would have asked his son. And so I think I didn't realize it at the time, but I do think that had quite an effect on me. And so as I was thinking about when I was young, you vision your life and how your life is going to be. And so all I really wanted to do was marry. Now, if you Google handsome farmer, you can get some good pictures. Now, I used to not tell people this because it's kind of embarrassing, that really was my goal. My daughters cringe when they hear me tell the story. But I've gotten to the age where I'm comfortable, telling you this. And so, and it's a reflection of who my dad was and who my parents were really, because I just wanted to emulate their lives. I wanted to have a life like they had. And so that's what I envisioned myself doing. So I came up with a plan. So I decided to go to Mizzou and major in agriculture, and I would meet this handsome farmer. So I majored in dairy science and animal science. And so, I was pretty smart. I got through in 3.5 years. So I'm in my last fall semester, and it is dawning on me, okay, this is not working out. I had not met this farmer of my dreams, okay? And I was starting to panic. Oh my gosh, I've got to do something with my life. I'm going to graduate. What am I going to do? So of course I did what everybody else does, right? I went to grad school. My story is not nearly as profound as theirs. So I started looking at grad schools, and I had a professor as an undergrad who really took me under his wing, and he talked to me about grad school, and he actually offered me an assistantship at Mizzou, and I really wanted to stay there. My best friend was in vet school, and we could live together, and it would be great. But my professor who mentored me said, you've really gotten everything out of this place that you're probably going to get, and you really need to go somewhere else. And I didn't really want to, but so I agreed that I would look around, and I looked around, and I went to Iowa State, and there was just something about it that sort of called me, and I really loved it. Iowa State is a fabulous ag college, and it was a very different experience than being at the University of Missouri. And I really loved it. I really loved it there. And so the 2 years that I spent there on my master's were really formative years in my life, because it was really in my master's that I really figured out that academia was where I belonged. And also, the second thing that I figured out during that time, does anybody recognize that? Yes, it's true. Keith did have hair at one point in time. Can you believe that? Isn't that something? And I had investments in Aquanet hairspray. And so I met Keith, and we fell in love and got married. And so Keith was finishing his PhD in animal breeding at Iowa State, and I finished my master's. And so we moved to Athens, Georgia, because he came here as a postdoc under Dr. Larry Benishek. Probably some of you know him. And he came here as a postdoc, and so we didn't know how long we'd be here. But at that point, I kind of figured out that I wanted to keep going. I wanted to get a PhD. So I went ahead and started a PhD program, not knowing really what was going to happen. And good thing I did, because after 2 years, he became a permanent faculty member. So here we are, couple with 2 PhDs. What do you do, okay? So that was before the days of spousal hires. That was not in anyone's lexicon. And so a job at Clemson opened, and so I applied for it, and I got it. And so Clemson's about 75 miles. Didn't seem horrible. And we thought, oh, we'll do this for 5 years, And so we kind of started, looking around. But 2 people with PhDs in this, both animal scientists, that is a tall order. And we really struggled with that. So we had this situation. We did this for 20 years, okay? 20 years. We thought it'd be 5, it was 20. And in some ways those years were tough because we commuted. We lived in Hartwell, Georgia for about 10 years. And then we moved into South Carolina, into Anderson County for the last 10, just for logistics reasons with our kids being in school. And, a few people asked me along the way, like, why don't you just quit your job? And I thought about that. But Keith never wanted me to do that. Keith really believes in me. And he wanted me to, to have a career. He wanted me to do whatever I was meant to do, And so he was a tremendous support to me. Now, when we lived in Anderson, he commuted to Athens, okay? That's an hour and 15 minutes. And we had 2 daughters. Oh, no, sorry, not ready for that yet. We had 2 daughters, and I can't tell you how many times he drove from Athens to Anderson, picked him up, drove 45 minutes to Greenville, and take him to soccer practice. So he was the consummate support system. And we could never have done that if we didn't put our family first. We both always put our family first. And so we never could have done what we've done if we hadn't made that decision. And it wasn't really a decision, it was just sort of who we were. And so I was at Clemson, and I was there for 20 years. And I was a dairy extension specialist, and I found this picture that I can't believe I wore a skirt to a dairy field day. Isn't that hilarious? But it looks like they're actually listening to me. So here was my appointment at Clemson. So I started out in a 30% teaching and 70% extension. So, as I said, I'm a product of 4-H, and so I was very attracted to extension. And so that's how I started out in extension as a dairy extension specialist. So then I got promoted, tenured and promoted, and became an associate professor. And then in about 1991, 92, our extension service got in some difficult financial times. And so here's what happened. My department head came to me and he said, I'd really like you to move into a research appointment. And I said, well, I don't really think I want to do that. I want to stay in extension. I said, okay. So he came back to me. I'd really like you to move into a research appointment. I really don't want to do that. But okay, 4 times. After the 4th time, I said, okay, I'll do this. Because he needed me to for budgetary reasons. And so I did, and I actually had a 3-way appointment, which is not recommended. And I had that for 2 years. And by the way, I had both of my children in my 10-year probationary period, which I also do not recommend. And so you can see, through my appointments, I just kept migrating more and more into teaching. And that's where I ended up for a long time at Clemson in a 60% teaching appointment. And as I said, along the way came these 2 little gems. And that was the older one was in the Dairy Heifer Project, and that was her Heifer, Glad was her name. And I drugged these girls everywhere. And when I was at Clemson, so I was a nutritionist, and I did a lot of work in use of pastures. So the way that you calculate intake from pasture is you give them this bolus of chromic oxide, which is not digestible. So you calculate the percentage in what they eat, and then you calculate the percentage of it in what they excrete. So I spent a lot of time collecting fecal samples. And there were times that they were with me. I drug them with me everywhere. And so they thought that's what I did. They told their friends at school that their mom sticks her arm up a cow's butt. That's what she does. So that's what all their friends think I did all those years, which I did a lot of that actually, but I did some other things too. So then in 2006, I came back to Georgia, and believe me, it was a happy day when Joe Broder called me and offered me the job. And so I've been here now for 10 years. I just got vested 2 months ago, isn't that great? And so I have really enjoyed my time here, especially the last 5 years. I feel like I've really grown in the position and what I've been able to do. It's been interesting, it's been enjoyable. I've been on the Dean's Cabinet for 10 years, so being in that room and hearing that perspective from what goes on in the whole college is really interesting, and it's an exciting place to be. It's kind of the center of the college, and I really enjoyed that a lot. And so I asked Laura, I said, well, you want me to talk about my work? That doesn't sound very interesting. So I'll talk about lessons learned. She said, okay, you can do that. So she gave me permission. Okay, so I have I think 4 lessons. Okay, so the first thing is that you have to have a mentor. And for me, I've never had a female mentor because there just really hasn't been any. And that's okay. Men can mentor women quite well. And for me, some people have like this lifelong mentor, and I never had that. I had this person at this stage in my career, and this person here, and this person here. But the thing is, everybody needs a mentor, and you shouldn't be afraid to find one. And I can think of times when I needed to be mentored more than I was, and I needed to go to somebody and say, do you think this is a good idea? Because it wasn't, and I did it anyway. and I needed a mentor to tell me that's not a good idea. And so my message is don't be afraid to ask people, because that makes people feel good when you ask them to mentor you. And so you should never be afraid, and you should always have a mentor, and really seek that out. Now, this is the one that made me kind of nervous here, because this is really personal, and I know some of you maybe think this is sort of politically incorrect, but the person you spend your life with is a really important decision that you make. And, I said it earlier, but Keith has been so supportive of me, I can't even tell you. He would do anything for me. And as I said earlier, because we've always put our family first, it's worked out for us. And I think if one of us had a more selfish attitude that this is about me, or it would never have worked. And so because we put our family first, it really has worked out for us. And this is what our family looks like today. Our daughters are both married now, and Keith doesn't have any hair, and mine is gray. And we don't look anything like that picture I showed you all ago, but that's okay. Okay, and now this one too is a little weird. So stuff's gonna happen. And what I mean by that is being a female in a very dominated male, what's the word? Profession, thank you. Stuff's gonna happen, And a lot of stuff has happened to me. Most stuff falls in the category of you gotta just forget and get over it, Pretend that didn't happen, just move on, okay? Some stuff is more serious. And I'll give you a couple examples of the first category, of a couple of things that happened to me. Early in my career, I wasn't even at Clemson for a year. And I was a dairy extension specialist with a very specific job. And there was somebody in every state that had my job, and we had 2 regional meetings every year where we met. And the first meeting, that regional meeting I went to, this man, of course it was all men, he came up to me and he said, "Wow, well, the looks of our group just got a lot better." And I said, and it made me mad. And I said, "Well, thank you, but I hope I have more to contribute than that." And today I probably hug him if he said that to me. Back then, I was 28 years old and it made me so mad, you know? But that's the kind of stuff you just gotta get over. So another thing that happened to me not very long ago, about 5-6 years ago, I participated in Food Systems Leadership Institute, which is a leadership training program, which, by the way, is another thing I recommend is leadership training. So we had three residential sessions, and this one man missed the first session, came to the second one. So you kind of miss the bonding that goes on in your cohort when you miss the first one. So I was trying to be nice, and I was going to walk up to him and talk to him. And so we were at a break, and he was standing there, and there was all these people around him, like in a semicircle. I was the only woman, okay? I was on an end. And so he started, and he went around, shook hands, hello, hello, yucked it up with everybody. He got to me. He didn't even look at me. He didn't shake my hand. It completely ignored me. And I call that the invisible women syndrome. And that happens, you know? And again, you know, I walked away. It kind of made me mad, but you got to get over that kind of stuff, you know? So my point is that, you know, sometimes, like, you don't know what to do. You know, should I just get over this? Should I talk to somebody about this? Should I make a big deal about it? And so my advice is to always seek the counsel of another woman. You can find one somewhere. You come to me. You can go to Peggy. You can go to Laura. You can go to Chris. Talk it over with another woman before you do anything. I think that that's really important. So I guess that's all I have to say about that. And then the last thing is, it's your life. It's your life, and you have to own your life. And so there's two things that I mean by that. One is, you know, we all have to decide how we're spending the 24 hours in every day. But we have, as women, a lot of pressure on us. And I feel like there's too much pressure on women today to be everything and to do everything. And my point is that we should all do what we think is right for our lives, irregardless of what everybody else thinks. And you know, I have a tremendous respect for somebody like Peggy, who's had this fabulous, productive career. But I also respect people who make very different choices. Some of you may know Jennifer Cannon. She was a food scientist over at the Griffin campus. She was an assistant professor. She had a baby, and she quit her job. Not many people do that. And that had to have been a very hard decision for her. But I have tremendous respect for her, that she did that because she thought that was the best decision for her life. And so that's my point, is everybody, you should make the decision that is right for your life. Whatever that is, and you shouldn't apologize, you shouldn't feel bad about it, you should do what is right for you. And the other thing is that, and I know this is very cliche, but you have to have balance in your life. You have to have balance. If your life is not balanced, you will have health problems, you will have relationship problems, and it will all come crashing in. And you will reach a point in your life, I think, where you've decided that wasn't worth it when you're out of balance. Now, I'm not going to stand up here and tell you my life has always been in balance. It hasn't been. I have struggled through that myself. And there's two approaches to getting your life in balance when it's not. One is do it internally or do it externally. So you can do it internally by somehow changing your thinking and not letting stress get to you, not letting pressure get to you. And the other is to change it externally. Change your job, change your situation. So, but it's so important to have balance in your life. And finally, enjoy the journey. This was at the end of my oldest daughter's wedding, so we had the little flippers, we were sending them on there. So anyway, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, that was awesome. Okay, we have time for a few questions for Peggy or Jean. If anyone has a question, and we will let Polly tell us if there are any questions from the remote audiences. Anybody have a question?
For Dr. Bertram, when you were introduced, they were talking about trying to attract non-traditional students. Where are you in that program for non-traditional students who are interested in agriculture, animal science?
Well, I will tell you, most of our students are actually non-traditional. Yeah, so in the 10 years I've been here, the face of our students has changed a lot, and we are now almost the same level of minority students at the university. We're around 21%. I think the university's maybe 24%. So we've gone from 12% in 2006 to 21%. That's not all due to me, believe me. It's mostly due to Ron Walcott. But the profile of our students is not too different from the profile of the university. And so we have, our biggest challenge is getting rural and farm students into our college. That's probably our biggest challenge because it's so dang hard to get into UGA. And so, you know, it's always a balance, you know. We have a lot of students from Atlanta, and we have a lot of jobs for those students. We welcome those students because we have a lot of jobs, and we have to have them to fill these jobs. But actually, what we're even more concerned about now is the traditional, what we would think of as traditional students.
Any other questions? Polly, any questions from the remote? Maria has
I
one.
have a question. So I agree with you the importance of balance, but I guess that many people here will feel the same way that I feel, that I have not achieved that.
Yeah.
I also agree with you very much on that importance of the mentor.
Yeah.
And male, female, but there are some issues it's probably better that it's female.
Yeah.
So you as someone who's accomplished, and you probably are looked at now as a possible mentor, but I'm myself feeling that I have done nothing right. I feel so uncomfortable telling anyone or being the mentor of anyone. I say, I'm going to screw them. While I want to help, there's this extreme stress about, if I can't manage it myself, how am I going to help someone else? So in this idea, you tell people you have to look for a mentor. So tell us, what do we have to do if we want to help others, if we want to be mentors of others? How can we manage this extreme responsibility? How do you do it? How do you feel yourself able to mentor someone?
That's a really good question. You know, personally, I mean, my career's 30 years long, so I've been through all that. And I'm on the other side of it. And so I'm comfortable talking about where I am. I'm comfortable now talking about it. I was not comfortable talking about it, you know, 10, 15 years ago. I am comfortable talking about it now. And so, you know, I'm happy to mentor people because I'm comfortable talking about what I've been through. And so, I don't know how to answer your question, Maria.
Well, you know, I think a lot of times the mentor doesn't always have the answers. It's just about the willingness to sit down and discuss and learn. And sometimes just saying, you know, I felt that exact same way. Let me tell you about when my kids were little, you know. And so I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think any of us have all the answers.
As scientists, we want to have the answers. Because of the stress.
Yeah, it
is.
You're willing to talk, but you say, I'm not helping.
Yeah, don't do what I did. Do the Any other questions?
I have a question about some of the things that women have to deal with in science, and some of the stuff that you say, well, suck it up, and some stuff is obviously a lot more serious. So, I mean, how do we deal with those things? Because if you look at what has happened in science in general now with all the sexual harassment stuff, so, you know, how do we, you know, where do you draw the line? When, you know?
You know, I don't know how to answer that because I've been through that. Okay, I have been, and it happened to me more than once, but mostly when I was very young in my career. And so I just, I was at a point where, okay, so I'm either at the point I file a grievance or I just have to just kind of deal with this. And, you know, right or wrong, when you're young and you file a grievance, a sexual harassment grievance, it might be the right thing to do, but you're gonna pay a price for that. I'm not saying that's right. It's not right, but you will. I mean,
Shouldn't we as women make sure that we don't pay a price for that?
We should, if we can. Sometimes there's not anything you can do about it, though. And, you know, my philosophy, the world is changing, okay? The world, I think, is way better than it was 30 years ago when I started. And the world is changing, I think, because men, because their wives or their daughters have experienced unfair treatment. And that's when it becomes real for them. And that's, to me, that's what makes the world change. So, you know, it's tough. I don't know how to answer that. I have fought a lot of battles in my career, believe me. I don't know, anybody else got something?
Lauren?
I have a question for Peggy about GMOs. I would think, could you talk a little bit about how you speak with groups who are very concerned about genetically modified food? I think that's an interesting thing. We all need to hear that.
Yeah, it's not an easy task.
Right.
Because a lot of the groups that are concerned are only concerned because they see their friends are concerned on social media and they really know nothing about the science behind it. And they may not really even have the background that allows them to understand much about the science about it. I try to educate, you know, I do talk to, you know, in outreach programs to various groups and try to give just some basic information about how what we're doing now is just kind of on a continuum for what humans have been doing for the last 10,000 years. And of course, with the pace at which science is progressing, we can do things a lot faster now than we used to be able to do in terms of genetically modifying plants. But yeah, I mean, that is a real challenge to educate the general public on GMOs and allay the fears. Because a lot of it, well, you know, in some cases is not even based on rational opinions.
And I think that's one of the challenges for us in agriculture is to understand the issue, to be able to discuss it. Wayne Parrott, you've probably seen a lot of things in the popular press, that a lot of articles that he has done, a lot of talks, but we're working on making a video that we can use on the subject of GMOs, and Office of Communications is helping us with that. And I think part of the issue is we've been scared to tell the story, or we have a hard time discussing those issues, and we've got to be able to articulate the facts based on science-based information.
And I think it's also unfortunate the definition of organic includes non-GMO, because there's really a lot that could be benefited from in the organic community by genetically modified organisms in terms of pest control.
Well, one of the things we're trying to get an extension is just a one-pager of all of those words that no one understands, like organic, GMOs, value-added, all that kind of stuff, so that we have something that we can kind of all have the correct information and pass that on. So I think that's a continual challenge. Okay, I saw a hand. We've got.
They'll just speak up.
Okay, Tifton, we'll give you a question. We're getting close on time, but we don't want to leave you out.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Navarro. I'm Sarah Cook. I was one of your Masters of Ag Leadership students a few years ago. And I think you're holding yourself to too high of a standard, because I saw you as being a mentor just by having your kids in your office with you while you're teaching classes, showing that you can be a mother, because I'm a mother of two. And I think we don't have to be a complete 100% finished professional person to be a mentor. I had a young girl from ABAC that was getting ready to graduate this coming December asking me about how to get in the door and start her career. and I'm young in my career, but I was still able to give her tips. So I think don't hold yourself to too high of a standard because you're still doing that in what you do.
Great. That's a super note to end on. I want to thank our speakers. It is a hard task to pick two people out of the wide field of agriculture, but I think these were two awesome speakers. We've got just a little thank you for y'all. Neither one of these ladies were really excited to talk about it. And so I really appreciate them doing this. And the interesting thing about this is when we know more about someone personally, when we know, the next time you see Peggy or Jean, I know you'll feel comfortable speaking. And so thank you for being willing to put yourself out there. And I encourage all of you to think about ways that you can reach out. Think about ways that you can get to know others and introduce yourself. Yeah, shake hands with everyone in the group. But let me tell you that the next leadership luncheon is going to be scheduled sometime during the first part of November. Part of the challenge is getting a room when the classes aren't in the rooms. And if you have any teaching appointment, you might know that they've gone to a centralized scheduling that is really challenging us all. And so please watch your inbox. If you have suggestions for speakers, send me an email. I would appreciate that. I want to thank a few people before we close. Carla was really doing most of the work here helping me set this up, so I really appreciate her help. And we had some of our ambassadors hosting today. I appreciate you being here. And most of all, I just want to thank everyone that came. I appreciate you wanting to start a conversation with the people that you work and live with a lot of the time so that we can all get to know each other better so we can do a better job promoting this field of agriculture. So thank you for being here, and please be sure to sign up on our listserv. We've got a Facebook page. We also have a listserv. So sometimes we're sending out interesting tidbits of information, and also we've got several publications that are in the work. Lauren Ledbetter Griffin is kind of heading that up for us, but a lot of the information that we collected at the Women's Ag Summit last February, we're going to be publishing that information. So stay tuned, and I hope you'll stay involved. Thank you for joining us.